TV shows ever.
The 7 years you spend here as a surgical resident will be the best and worst of your life. This is your starting line. This is your arena.
Lives of the surgeons intertwine in and out of the OR.
This is...
Dr. Shepard, we should pretend it never happened.
Who here feels like they have no idea what they're doing?
Fall in love all over again with the medical mysteries, heartbreaking stories, and roller coaster relationships.
So pick me, choose me, love me.
Grey's Anatomy, Monday nights at 10:30 on ViuTV6.
Good evening, I'm Joel Labi in Hong Kong. Welcome to this late edition of ViuTV News. Ahead on the show tonight, President Trump delivers a defiant speech at the start of the APEC summit in Vietnam, warning the US will not tolerate chronic trade abuses. Trump's Chinese counterpart taking a softer tone, Xi Jinping calling for more balanced and inclusive globalisation. The local delegate to China's top legislative body says booing the Chinese anthem damages Hong Kong's image. All right, well, two of the world's most powerful leaders, two very different political stances. This was the case at the APEC summit in Vietnam, where Donald Trump and Xi Jinping struck contrasting tones. The US president slamming regional players for what he called chronic trade abuses. But in an apparent counter-move, Xi used his speech to rally support for globalisation. Grace Lee has the story.
A stern warning from Donald Trump at the APEC summit on Friday.
The United States will no longer turn a blind eye to violations, cheating, or economic aggression.
According to Trump, the U.S. has been treated unfairly when it comes to trade, something that won't be tolerated anymore under his America First policy.
I will make bilateral trade agreements with any Indo-Pacific nation that wants to be our partner and that will abide by the principles of fair and reciprocal trade.
But just one day after their meeting in Beijing, Chinese leader Xi Jinping stepped up just a few moments later with a very different message from Trump, flying the flag for globalization and multilateral deals.
China's steps toward openness won't stop. We will work together with other countries to push for the liberalization of trade.
The APEC summit, which has long championed free trade, has itself been shaken by the changes under Trump, not least because of his dramatic exit from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But other Pacific nations refuse to give up on the cause.
We're committed to it. We believe TPP is important for the region.
After Trump abandoned the deal early in his presidency, the remaining 11 members have been struggling to keep it alive. And getting a reading on the situation hasn't been easy. Earlier, Japan said Pacific nations had agreed on a way forward that would keep TPP alive, but according to Canada, no such agreement exists.
All right, staying with the summit, and New Zealand's Prime Minister is pushing her agenda on the world stage. Jacinda Ardern saying climate change should be the focus of every world leader.
It's not easy. There will be trade-offs for all of us. But we owe it to ourselves, our children and our future generation. Now, my government is doing just that. We've announced an intention to pass a Zero Carbon Act. We will be putting into law a new goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And we'll also be proposing to establish a climate commission to provide independent advice to the government on climate issues, such as our new goal to transition New Zealand to 100% renewables by 2035.
OK, to local news now, and a local deputy to China's top legislative body has slammed Hong Kong football fans for booing the national anthem at a friendly last night. Rita Fan says it gives the international community a feeling that Hong Kongers do not respect their own country, and it's tarnishing the city's image. Now, this comes as the government here figures out how it will introduce a controversial law which would make it illegal to disrespect the anthem. Fan believes some people will still challenge the law by jeering the song after the local enactment is done with, as she warned that more booing would further polarise the city.
If they do it more often and even more vigorously, there will be a reaction from people in the community who love the country. And then this sort of confrontational emotion will become more intense. And that is very sad.
Now, fellow political heavyweight Maria Tam struck a more optimistic tone, saying the jeerers yesterday were already markedly better than those who booed the anthem in the past. Tam says fans were more restrained last night because they didn't try to drown out the national song by shouting out slogans. The Basic Law Committee member also clarified details about the national law, saying it doesn't require everyone to stand during the song. She also says when it comes to enforcement, police will consider the context.
It's only when you join a particular occasion within a particular location, you are there for a certain purpose. And if it is part of the arrangement that the national anthem will be played and you're asked to stand up, then I think you should stand up. If you don't stand, it doesn't mean that automatically you're guilty of anything, because we have to prove that you have a mens rea, you have the intention to insult or disrespectful.
For the first time in 9 years, a traditional motion of thanks has passed for Chief Executive Carrie Lam's policy address. This is in response to her speech last month in which she outlined her vision. The reason this hasn't happened in so long, until now, pro-Beijing lawmakers hadn't held a majority in LegCo. It took 3 days of debate to pass the motion 43-15, but as you'd expect, not all lawmakers are happy. Real estate rep Abraham Razak blasted Lam's plan to convert public rental flats into cheap units to sell to the city's poor, saying it will only worsen the housing crisis here. All right, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. And starting with some developing and extraordinary news about Hong Kong's flagship carrier, Cathay Pacific has been booted off the main share index here. The Hang Seng Index has removed it after decades of trading, following abysmal year financially for the carrier in August. We should remind you, Cathay posted its worst half-yearly result in 20 years. It blamed fierce competition and jet fuel costs for that. The stock has tanked nearly 50% since 2010 and currently sits at just over 12 Hong Kong dollars a share. Now, on the market, local shares were flat on Friday, the Hang Seng dipping less than 0.1%, but it has had a pretty bullish week, soaring more than 1.8% since Monday, buoyed by a steady flow of money from the mainland. And while market action was a tad sluggish today, the same cannot be said for the city's economy. Third quarter GDP is up 3.6% compared to this time last year, better than what many analysts were expecting. Now, much of that growth is thanks to an uptick in retail spending and also tourism from the mainland. Unemployment also remains low at 3.1%. Toshiba's shares have plunged sharply today on fears of dilution. There are reports it's planning to issue new shares to raise funds. Strapped for cash, no thanks to its bankrupt US nuclear unit, the company needs to beef up its balance sheet as soon as possible to avoid delisting. Sources say Toshiba hopes to raise about $5.3 billion with third-party allotted shares. It's also said to be finalising the capital injection plan by year's end, since it needs shareholder approval, depending on the offering price and also the scope of share dilution. A big announcement from Beijing today. China is lifting foreign ownership limits in local financial firms. Now, among the changes, overseas investors will soon be able to own a controlling 51% stake in these companies, up from the current 49%, and full ownership will be allowed in 3 years' time. Limits on foreign ownership of local banks, insurance firms and asset management companies will also be dropped later. The move comes just a day after US President Donald Trump repeated calls for better access to the Chinese markets in his meetings with President Xi Jinping. Now, one of the major headlines from Trump's maiden trip to China, a suite of deals worth $250 billion. But will these lofty agreements live up to their price tag? David Pollard investigates.
High-worth handshakes in Beijing as Boeing, General Electric and others do deals worth a nominal $250 billion, with, from Donald Trump, words his Chinese counterpart might see as priceless on one of the biggest issues between them, the trade deficit.
I don't blame China. Who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
China spoke on another issue.
The business environment for investment of foreign companies, including US companies, will become increasingly open, transparent and standardized.
Grand words that might, analysts say, be out of sync with reality. China's exports to the US rose in October. Its trade surplus, though down from September's record, still at nearly $27 billion. With mid-term election pressure at home, Trump could soon ramp up his anti-China rhetoric again, while many of the deals are non-binding.
I don't think we should read too much into the announcement today. It's very much a set-piece announcement.
And as for China's promise of greater transparency,
there is a balancing act to strike between trying to protect Chinese corporate interests and trying to keep international partners, and the US being the most important, on side. I think it's going to be one of very gradual evolution rather than a radical move towards transparency.
Even so, $250 billion price tag may enhance Trump's reputation back home as a deal-maker, though his bid to get China to cut financial ties with North Korea, a former ally, is thought likely to fail, amid questions over whether this visit is a genuine breakthrough in relations or what the cynics would call gesture politics.
To the latest in the Time Warner buyout now, and AT&T's CEO says he won't be selling CNN to win antitrust approval. And if the US Justice Department blocks his $85 billion purchase, he's ready to go to the courts. Here's Fred Katayama.
AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson on the offensive. He says he's willing to go to court if the Justice Department blocks its $85.4 billion deal to buy media giant Time Warner. He also said he would ask for an expedited hearing. Sources tell Reuters antitrust regulators want AT&T to sell its DirecTV satellite unit or its Turner broadcasting business that includes the news network CNN. Justice officials believe the proposed purchase would raise costs for rival distributors and stifle innovation. Stephenson said at a conference Thursday, AT&T will not sell CNN to win antitrust approval. The company has also signaled it wouldn't